This LG G6 was released in 2017 for a list price of about $650. It's a really good phone, still works just fine after almost 5 years. Had a glass back, which I'm not a fan of. You can see it's a little beat up from repeated drops. The power button doubles as a fingerprint reader, which is really convenient. Also pretty responsive. Has two cameras at the back. One is 12 millimeters f2.4 maximum aperture. The other is 30 millimeters f1.8 maximum aperture. Both cameras are 13 megapixels. Some of the things I like about this phone is that it came with its own FM radio, which is, I don't think that's pretty common. The display is fine. We'll try to play some YouTube videos, see how that loads. So it plays YouTube videos just fine. Let's try a game. The camera app on this now almost 5-year-old phone is really cool. You can turn it into manual mode, where you have more control over the ISO, shutter speed, exposure compensation, focus, white balance, and so on. There's even a histogram on the bottom left. So when you make a change, let's say I want to change the exposure value to make it brighter, you can see the graph changing, and to make it darker, you see the graph changing, which is really useful. Now, generally speaking, if you know how to operate this stuff, you probably already have a camera. But if you only have your phone, this is still very, very useful. So for demonstration purposes, I took some pictures, similar pictures as much as I could, with this phone and with an A6400 Sony, paired with a Sigma 30mm f1.4, but I stopped the aperture down to f1.8, and here are the results. On the right will be the Sony, on the left will be the phone images. The first 6 pictures are from the phone. You can see the ISO is 300 for the brightest image. For the darkest image, the ISO for the phone on the phone image is 200, and the one in between it's 250. On the camera, the ISO varies depending on where I'm focusing. In retrospect, perhaps I should have used the same ISO, but I wanted to try to see how both the camera and the phone adjusted exposure based on exposure compensation. So I kept the exposure compensation at negative 0.3 for all the shots. With the camera images, it's focused on different objects, and the objects that are not in focus are blurred out. For this demonstration, I'll use the camera image. that focuses on this lotion bottle. For the phone images, it generally keeps everything in focus, or tries to. So even though I touched various objects, the only thing changed was the exposure, but everything looks just as sharp. So for comparison, I'll use the brightest image, which would be this one, shot at 300 ISO. So if we blow this up, no, hardly anybody is going to, well, anybody who's using a camera phone is going to be blowing up their pictures this amount. Let me try to make it even. Most people are going to just try to take a picture of whatever they're looking at, and if they can recognize it, they'll say, yep, this is a good picture, for the most part. And I'm not trying to be condescending, but in general, when we do this pixel peeping thing, it's just for a small percentage of photographers even who do this. So it's academic, but in reality, does anybody do that when they're taking a picture, or if they get a nice moment on a photo, do they toss it because they can see pixels? Not really. But you can see that the phone image on the left holds its own, I think, really nicely against the A6400. Now, as a reminder, this is a 13 megapixel camera released in 2017. And this is a 24 megapixel camera, the A6400, with a fast Sigma lens. Now, what's the point of this? I believe if you have a camera, just use it. Doesn't matter if it's on a phone or an actual camera. But for most purposes, a phone camera will do just fine. I know a lot of people who have bought $1,400 cameras and it just sits on a shelf somewhere because they take all their pictures with their phone. In my opinion, that's a huge waste. Unless you're going to be a hobbyist, or you're collecting cameras, or you're going to be a professional, don't even bother, because you're just going to have paperweight, and your phone can do just fine. Is there anybody who's going to say this is not a good picture? And I haven't even edited it yet. Plus, these phones can now save the raw image. So if you look at this one, this is a raw version of this 300 ISO phone image. And let's just let Lightroom do its thing. It's even a little bit brighter. So we've recovered a whole heap of detail in the shadows. And I haven't adjusted saturation or any of that just yet, or noise and so on. And a lot of apps, many apps can do just this for free. Whether it is applying filters or adjusting the brightness or contrast, you know. All right, so I think this is a good enough camera. And it also says a lot about where technology is. I don't think it's improved that much in the last 5 years. At least they're trying their best to convince us that it's gotten so much better. But not really. Not really. On paper it does. Obviously, as a photographer, I would prefer this picture over here. But if someone showed you this, they could point out all the objects. Everything looks reasonably bright without looking at this side by side, without having the effect of blurred background and so on. These would be indistinguishable to the average consumer.